The sun had not yet risen when Sergeant Maria Rodriguez felt the ground shake beneath her boots. She was crouched behind a damaged concrete wall, her sniper rifle steady in her hands, watching the horizon through her scope. The desert stretched endlessly before her, painted in shades of purple and orange as dawn approached. Behind her, 230 Marines were trapped in what used to be a small outpost in the mountains of Afghanistan. Maria had been with the Marine Corps for 6 years. She joined right after high school, wanting to serve her country and prove that women could fight alongside men in combat. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had tried to talk her out of it. Her mother cried for weeks, but Maria knew this was her path. She was one of the best marksmen in her unit, male or female. Her steady hands and sharp eyes had saved many lives over the years. The outpost was supposed to be a routine mission. Intelligence reports said the area was mostly clear of enemy forces. The Marines were there to establish a temporary base and gather information about local activities. But intelligence was wrong. Very wrong. It started 3 days ago when the first rockets hit their position. The enemy had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. What seemed like a small group of insurgents quickly grew into a massive force. Hundreds of fighters had surrounded the outpost during the night, cutting off all escape routes. The Marines found themselves trapped with limited ammunition, food, and water. Captain James Mitchell, the commanding officer, had immediately called for backup. But the nearest reinforcements were 2 days away by land, and helicopter support was impossible due to heavy enemy anti-aircraft weapons in the area. The Marines were on their own, at least for now. Maria remembered the moment when Captain Mitchell pulled her aside. His face was grim, dirt and sweat covering his features. "Rodriguez, I need you to take position on the North Tower. You're our eyes and ears out there. We're counting on you to spot their movements and take out their leaders when possible." She nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. I won't let you down." The North Tower was a 3-story building that gave her a clear view of the surrounding area. It was dangerous being up there alone, but it was the best vantage point they had. Maria climbed the stairs carefully, her rifle slung across her back, extra ammunition weighing down her pack. From her position, she could see the enemy forces moving in the distance. They had set up camps about a mile away, just out of range of most weapons, but close enough to launch attacks. Through her scope, she counted at least 400 fighters, maybe more. They had vehicles, heavy weapons, and seemed well organized. This was not a random attack by local insurgents. This was a planned operation by experienced fighters. The first major assault came at sunset on the second day. Maria watched through her scope as dozens of vehicles raced toward the outpost, kicking up clouds of dust. She could hear Captain Mitchell's voice over the radio, coordinating the defense. "All units, prepare for contact. Rodriguez, I need accurate fire on those lead vehicles." Maria steadied her breathing and lined up her shot. The lead vehicle was an old pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the back. The driver was pushing it hard, bouncing over rocks and holes in the desert floor. She followed the vehicle for a few seconds, calculating wind speed and distance. Then she squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The bullet struck the driver and the vehicle swerved off course, crashing into a large boulder. The machine gunner was thrown from the truck bed, his weapon silenced. The other vehicles slowed down, unsure of where the shot had come from. "Good shot, Rodriguez," Captain Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio. "Keep them guessing." The battle continued for hours. The enemy forces attacked from multiple directions, trying to find weak spots in the Marine defenses. Maria moved between different windows in the tower, taking careful shots at enemy leaders and weapon operators. Each shot had to count. Ammunition was running low, and every bullet wasted could mean the difference between life and death for her fellow Marines. As night fell, the attacks became more intense. The enemy fighters seemed to have night vision equipment, giving them an advantage in the darkness. Maria had to rely on muzzle flashes and the occasional flare to spot her targets. The sound of gunfire was constant, punctuated by explosions from rocket-propelled grenades and mortar rounds. During a brief lull in the fighting, Maria heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. She spun around, rifle ready, but relaxed when she saw Corporal Danny Martinez climbing toward her position. Danny was a good kid from Texas, barely 20 years old, but already a veteran of 2 deployments. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he whispered, "Captain Mitchell sent me to check on you. He also wanted me to give you this." Danny handed her a water bottle and some energy bars. "How are we looking out there?" Maria took a long drink of water before answering. "Not good, Corporal. They've got us surrounded, and they're testing our defenses from every angle. I've taken out maybe a dozen of their fighters, but there are too many of them. They're wearing us down." Danny nodded grimly. "The captain says reinforcements are still at least 36 hours away. Can we hold out that long?" "We have to," Maria replied simply. "There's no other choice." After Danny left, Maria settled back into her position. She cleaned her rifle carefully, checking every part to make sure it was functioning perfectly. In situations like this, equipment failure could be fatal. She also organized her remaining ammunition, counting each round. She had enough for maybe 40 more shots if she was careful. The enemy's next attack came just before midnight. This time, they tried a different approach. Instead of a direct assault, they sent small groups of fighters to probe the Marine defenses. Maria watched through her scope as teams of 3 or 4 men crept through the darkness, trying to get close enough to throw grenades or plant explosive charges. She picked off the lead man in the first team, causing the others to dive for cover behind rocks and bushes. But they kept coming. For every fighter she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take his place. The enemy commander was smart, using these small attacks to wear down the Marine ammunition while gathering information about their defensive positions. By dawn, Maria was exhausted. She had been awake for over 24 hours, taking shots whenever targets presented themselves. Her eyes burned from staring through the rifle scope, and her shoulders ached from holding the same position for hours at a time, but she couldn't rest. The Marines below were depending on her to keep watch. As the sun rose on what would be their 3rd day under siege, Maria saw something that made her blood run cold. Through her scope, she could see the enemy forces gathering for what looked like a major assault. Vehicles were lined up, heavy weapons were being moved into position, and hundreds of fighters were checking their equipment and weapons. She grabbed her radio and called down to Captain Mitchell. "Sir, this is Rodriguez. You need to see this. They're preparing for a big push. Looks like they're throwing everything they have at us." The captain's voice was tired but determined. "Roger that, Rodriguez. How long do you think we have?" Maria studied the enemy positions carefully. "Maybe an hour, sir. 2 at most. They're being very methodical about their preparations." "Understood. All units, prepare for major contact. This could be the big one." Maria took a deep breath and settled into her position. She had a feeling that the real test was about to begin. The fate of 230 Marines might depend on how well she could shoot in the next few hours. She thought briefly of her family back home in California, of her father who would be proud of her service, and her mother who worried about her every day. Then she focused on the task at hand. Through her scope, she could see the enemy commander giving orders to his fighters. He was a tall man with a beard, wearing military-style clothing and carrying an assault rifle. Maria could take the shot, but he was at the extreme edge of her range, and there were too many other fighters around him. If she missed, she would give away her position for nothing. She decided to wait. Better to pick her shots carefully when the attack began. The enemy forces were almost ready. Maria could see vehicles starting their engines and fighters taking their final positions. In a few minutes, the battle for the outpost would reach its climax. The young sergeant from California adjusted her grip on the rifle and whispered a quiet prayer. She had trained for moments like this, but nothing could truly prepare someone for the reality of combat. All she could do was trust her training, stay calm, and do her job. The lives of her fellow Marines depended on it. The attack began with a massive explosion that shook the entire outpost. Maria felt the tower sway beneath her as an enemy rocket struck the main building below. Dust and debris filled the air, and for a moment she couldn't see anything through her scope. When the dust settled, she saw them coming. Dozens of vehicles raced across the desert toward the outpost, their engines roaring and guns blazing. Behind them, hundreds of fighters advanced on foot, firing as they ran. The sound was deafening. Automatic weapons, explosions, and the shouts of men in battle. Maria had never seen anything like it. She forced herself to stay calm and picked her first target. A technical vehicle with a mounted heavy machine gun was leading the charge, its weapon spraying bullets at the Marine positions below. Maria lined up her shot, accounting for the vehicle's speed and the distance. The crosshairs settled on the gunner, and she squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The gunner fell backward, his weapon going silent. But there was no time to celebrate. Another vehicle was already taking its place, and more fighters were advancing from different directions. For the next hour, Maria worked like a machine. She moved between windows in the tower, taking shots at high-value targets, officers giving orders, machine gun operators, rocket launcher teams. Each shot had to count, because ammunition was running critically low. She had started the day with 40 rounds and was already down to 25. Below her, she could hear the desperate battle being fought by her fellow Marines. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the radio constantly, directing fire and trying to coordinate the defense. But the enemy forces were overwhelming them through sheer numbers. "Rodriguez, I need you to take out that sniper on the ridge," the captain's voice crackled through her headset. "He's got our east wall pinned down." Maria swung her rifle toward the ridge line about 800 meters away. It took her several seconds to spot the enemy sniper, who was well hidden behind rocks and vegetation. She could see the muzzle flash when he fired, but getting a clear shot would be difficult. The range was at the limit of her rifle's effective distance, and the target was only visible for brief moments. She waited patiently, watching for her opportunity. The enemy sniper fired again, and this time she was ready. The moment she saw the muzzle flash, she fired at the position. Through her scope, she saw the enemy fighter roll away from his position, clutching his shoulder. He wasn't dead, but he was out of the fight. "Target neutralized," she reported over the radio. "Good work, Rodriguez. Now I need you to focus on that mortar team setting up behind the rocks at grid reference 234567. Maria adjusted her position and found the mortar team. 3 fighters were working quickly to set up their weapon, which could cause massive damage to the outpost if they got it operational. The range was about 600 meters, well within her capability, but the targets were moving around, making precise shots difficult. She decided to take out the man who appeared to be the team leader first. He was standing slightly apart from the others, giving directions and pointing toward the outpost. Maria centered her crosshairs on his chest and fired. The man dropped instantly, and the other 2 fighters looked around in confusion, not sure where the shot had come from. Before they could react, Maria had already shifted her aim to the second fighter. Another squeeze of the trigger, another enemy down. The third man abandoned the mortar and ran for cover, but he didn't make it far before Maria's third shot found its mark. "Mortar team eliminated," she reported. The battle continued to rage around the outpost. From her elevated position, Maria could see that the Marines were fighting heroically, but were slowly being pushed back. The enemy had superior numbers and seemed to have unlimited ammunition. Several Marine positions had already been overrun, and the perimeter was shrinking. Corporal Martinez appeared at the bottom of the stairs again. "Sergeant Rodriguez, the captain needs you to come down. The tower might not be safe much longer." "I can do more good up here, Corporal. I have the best view of the battlefield." "Ma'am, with respect, That's an order from the captain. The enemy is bringing up heavy weapons, and this tower is going to be their primary target. Maria looked through her scope one more time. She could see exactly what Martinez was talking about. A group of fighters was setting up what looked like a recoilless rifle, a weapon capable of destroying the tower with a single shot. She grabbed her gear and followed Martinez down the stairs. Captain Mitchell was waiting for her in the main bunker. His face was streaked with dirt and blood from a minor shrapnel wound, but his eyes were still sharp and determined. Around him, the remaining Marines were checking their weapons and preparing for what might be their final stand. "Rodriguez, good work up there. How's our ammunition situation?" "I've got 12 rounds left, sir. I've been making every shot count." "I know you have. Listen, the situation has changed. Intelligence reports that enemy reinforcements are arriving within the hour. If we're going to survive this, we need to break their current attack and force them to regroup. I need you to take out their command structure." Maria nodded. "Where do you want me positioned, sir?" "There's a partially collapsed building on the south side. It's dangerous, but it gives you a clear shot at where we think their commanders are located. Are you up for it?" "Yes, sir." The run to the south building was terrifying. Enemy bullets whizzed past Maria's head as she sprinted across open ground, using destroyed vehicles and rubble for cover. Twice she had to dive behind cover as mortars exploded nearby, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. When she finally reached the building, she found it was in worse condition than it had appeared from a distance. Half the roof had collapsed, and several walls had large holes blown in them. But there was a second-floor window that gave her the view she needed. Through her scope, Maria could see a group of men gathered around what looked like a mobile command post. They had maps spread out on the hood of a vehicle and were clearly planning their next move. She counted at least 6 men, all of them carrying themselves with the confidence of experienced officers. The range was about 700 meters, challenging but manageable. The problem was that the men kept moving, making it difficult to get a clean shot. Maria settled into position and waited for her opportunity. It came when one of the men, apparently the senior commander, stepped away from the group to use a radio. For a moment, he was standing alone with no one else in the line of fire. Maria steadied her breathing, centered her crosshairs, and gently squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The commander fell immediately, and chaos erupted around the command post. The other officers scattered, diving for cover and shouting orders, but Maria was already looking for her next target. She spotted another officer trying to coordinate with a nearby unit via hand signals. This shot was more difficult because the man was partially hidden behind a vehicle, but Maria could see enough of him to make it work. Her second shot found its mark, and another enemy leader was eliminated. By now, the enemy forces had figured out approximately where the shots were coming from. Bullets began hitting the building around Maria's position, and she could hear vehicles moving to surround her location. She knew she couldn't stay much longer, but she had spotted one more high-value target. An enemy fighter with what appeared to be radio equipment was trying to coordinate the various attacking groups. If she could eliminate him, it might disrupt their coordination enough to give the Marines a chance. The shot required her to expose herself at the window for several seconds. Enemy bullets were already hitting the building, and she could hear vehicles getting closer. But Maria knew this might be the most important shot she ever took. She lined up the crosshairs, held her breath, and fired. Through her scope, she saw the radio operator fall, his equipment scattered across the ground. Then she rolled away from the window just as a rocket-propelled grenade exploded where she had been positioned. The building shook violently, and chunks of concrete fell from the ceiling. Maria grabbed her rifle and ran for the stairs, knowing the building wouldn't survive another direct hit. As she reached the ground floor, she could hear enemy voices getting closer. She made it back to the main outpost just as the enemy launched what appeared to be their final assault. Hundreds of fighters were advancing from all directions, overwhelming the remaining Marine positions through sheer numbers. But something had changed. The enemy advance was less coordinated than before, with different groups advancing at different speeds and in slightly different directions. Captain Mitchell grabbed her shoulder as she dove into the bunker. "Outstanding work, Rodriguez. Their command structure is in chaos. But we've still got a problem. My radio operator estimates we have maybe 200 fighters left. And they're all converging on our position." Maria checked her remaining ammunition. 8 rounds left. Not much for what was coming, but she would make them count. "What are your orders, sir?" "Hold this position at all costs. Reinforcements are 12 hours out. If we can survive until then, we win. If not..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The final assault was unlike anything Maria had experienced. Enemy fighters seemed to be coming from everywhere, climbing over rubble, charging through gaps in the perimeter, fighting with desperate determination. The Marines fought back with everything they had, but their ammunition was almost gone, and their numbers were dwindling. Maria took position at a window overlooking the main approach to the bunker. Through her scope, she could see enemy fighters advancing steadily despite the Marine resistance. She had to make her remaining shots count more than ever before. Maria steadied her rifle against the window frame and took careful aim at the advancing enemy fighters. She could see at least 30 men moving toward the bunker, using destroyed vehicles and rubble piles for cover. Behind them, more fighters were advancing in waves. The Marines were down to their last few magazines of ammunition, and every shot had to count. She selected her first target carefully, a fighter carrying what looked like explosives toward the bunker entrance. The range was only 200 meters, but the man was moving in a zigzag pattern, making the shot challenging. Maria led him slightly and squeezed the trigger. The fighter dropped, and the explosives scattered harmlessly across the ground. 7 rounds left. The enemy assault was relentless. For every fighter that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. Maria could hear Captain Mitchell coordinating the last desperate defense over the radio, his voice calm despite the hopeless situation. Several Marines had already run out of ammunition and were fighting with bayonets and whatever weapons they could find from fallen enemies. Through her scope, Maria spotted an enemy fighter setting up what looked like a rocket launcher aimed directly at the bunker. If that weapon fired, it would likely kill everyone inside. She didn't hesitate. Her second shot took out the rocket launcher operator before he could fire. 6 rounds left. Suddenly, Maria heard a new sound that made her heart sink. The distinctive roar of aircraft engines, but not the sound of friendly helicopters coming to rescue them. These were enemy aircraft, probably carrying reinforcements or heavy weapons. She looked up through a hole in the roof and saw 3 helicopters approaching fast. "All units, we have enemy air support incoming," Captain Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio. "Take cover and prepare for..." His transmission was cut off by a massive explosion as the first helicopter opened fire with rockets. The blast shook the entire outpost, and Maria was thrown against the wall. When she recovered, she could see that part of the main bunker had collapsed. Several Marines were trapped under the rubble, and others were running to help dig them out. The helicopters circled the outpost like vultures, firing at any Marines they could see in the open. Maria realized that unless someone could deal with the aircraft, the remaining defenders would be wiped out in minutes. But how could she fight helicopters with a sniper rifle? Then she remembered her training. Helicopters were vulnerable to precise rifle fire if you could hit critical components like the tail rotor or pilot. It was an extremely difficult shot, but it was possible. Maria had practiced similar shots during advanced sniper training, though never under combat conditions. She waited for one of the helicopters to come closer. The pilot was being aggressive, flying low to get better shots at the Marines below. As the aircraft passed overhead at about 150 meters altitude, Maria could see the pilot through the cockpit glass. She took a deep breath, led the helicopter slightly to account for its movement, and fired. The bullet struck the cockpit, and immediately the helicopter began to wobble. The pilot was either dead or severely wounded, and the aircraft was losing control. 5 rounds left. The helicopter crashed into the desert about 300 meters from the outpost, exploding in a ball of fire. The other 2 pilots immediately pulled back to a safer distance, but they continued to circle and fire at the Marine positions. Maria's successful shot had given the defenders a brief reprieve, but the situation was still desperate. Enemy fighters on the ground were advancing again, and the remaining helicopters were keeping the Marines pinned down. She could see that several more Marines had been wounded, and ammunition was almost completely exhausted. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the radio again, weaker now but still determined. "All units, this is likely our final stand. We've fought with honor, and I'm proud of every one of you. Rodriguez, if you're still out there, you've been outstanding. Give them hell." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes, but she wiped them away and focused on her scope. She would not give up while she still had ammunition and Marines to protect. She selected another target, an enemy fighter who appeared to be carrying a radio and giving orders to others. Her 4th shot eliminated him, disrupting the enemy coordination once again. 4 rounds left. The battle had now lasted over 3 hours, and Maria was running on pure adrenaline. Her hands were steady, but she was mentally and physically exhausted. Through her scope, she could see that the Marines had been pushed back to just the main bunker and a few surrounding positions. Maybe 50 Marines were still fighting out of the original 230. Then she heard something that made her heart race with hope. In the distance, barely audible over the sound of gunfire, was the distinctive whop-whop-whop of military helicopters. But these sounded different from the enemy aircraft. These sounded like American helicopters. Captain Mitchell must have heard it too because his voice came over the radio with more energy than she had heard in hours. "All units, I think I hear friendly aircraft approaching from the east. Hold your positions just a little longer." The enemy fighters seemed to sense that something was changing. Their attacks became more frantic, as if they knew their window of opportunity was closing. Maria watched through her scope as they made a final desperate push toward the bunker, throwing everything they had at the remaining Marines. She took careful aim at an enemy fighter carrying what looked like a flamethrower. If he reached the bunker with that weapon, he could cause massive casualties. The range was about 150 meters, and the man was running hard toward the Marine positions. Maria led him slightly and fired her 5th shot. The fighter went down, and the flamethrower clattered harmlessly across the rocks. 3 rounds left. The sound of helicopters was getting louder, and now Maria could see them on the horizon. 4 American attack helicopters were approaching fast, their weapon systems already engaging enemy positions in the distance. Behind them, she could see larger transport helicopters that probably carried Marines coming to reinforce the outpost. The enemy fighters began to realize that their situation had changed dramatically. Some continued to attack the bunker, but others were already starting to withdraw. The remaining enemy helicopters turned to engage the approaching American aircraft, and a fierce air battle began over the desert. Maria watched through her scope as one of the American helicopters fired a missile at an enemy aircraft. The explosion lit up the sky, and burning debris fell toward the desert floor. The tide was turning, but the battle wasn't over yet. A group of about 20 enemy fighters was making a final assault on the bunker entrance. They had managed to get close enough to throw grenades, and Maria could hear explosions from inside the building. Captain Mitchell and the remaining Marines were fighting for their lives just meters below her position. She couldn't get a clear shot at most of the attackers because they were too close to the bunker, but she spotted one fighter who had climbed onto a pile of rubble where he could fire down into the Marine positions. Maria's 6th shot took him out before he could cause more casualties. 2 rounds left. The American helicopters were now directly overhead, their guns blazing as they engaged enemy positions throughout the area. Maria could see enemy fighters running in all directions, some trying to escape and others trying to find cover. The organized attack on the outpost had completely fallen apart. But there was still immediate danger. One enemy fighter had managed to get inside the bunker and was fighting hand-to-hand with Marines in the narrow corridors. Through a hole in the wall, Maria could see the man had a pistol and was trying to reach the main command area where Captain Mitchell was located. She couldn't get a clear shot through the hole, but she could see the fighter would have to pass by a specific doorway to reach the command area. Maria aimed at that doorway and waited. When the enemy fighter appeared for just a second, she took her shot. Her 7th round found its target, and the immediate threat to the command center was eliminated. 1 round left. Transport helicopters were now landing outside the outpost, and Maria could see fresh Marines jumping out and moving toward the fighting. The enemy forces were in full retreat, but scattered groups were still putting up resistance. The battle was essentially over, but there were still dangerous moments ahead. Through her scope, Maria saw one last critical target. An enemy fighter had taken position behind a destroyed vehicle about 400 meters away and was firing at the newly arrived Marines with what looked like a sniper rifle. He had already wounded at least one of the reinforcements and was trying to line up another shot. This would be Maria's final shot, and it had to count. She had been fighting for hours, was exhausted, and her rifle had been subjected to intense combat conditions. But she steadied herself, controlled her breathing, and lined up the crosshairs on the enemy sniper. The shot was perfect. Her 8th and final round eliminated the last major threat to the Marine positions. As the enemy sniper fell, the shooting around the outpost finally began to quiet down. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the radio one last time. "All units, cease fire. The enemy is retreating. Reinforcements have arrived. Rodriguez, wherever you are, report to the command center immediately." Maria slung her empty rifle across her back and made her way down to the bunker. The scene inside was devastating. Wounded Marines were being treated by medics, and the walls were scarred by bullet holes and shrapnel. But they were alive, and they had held their position until help arrived. Captain Mitchell was bandaging a wounded Marine when she found him. He looked up as she approached, and she could see relief and pride in his eyes. "Sergeant Rodriguez, outstanding work. The commanders of the reinforcement unit want to debrief you, but first I want you to know you saved a lot of lives today. Your marksmanship and courage under fire were exceptional." Maria felt overwhelming exhaustion wash over her as the adrenaline finally wore off. "Thank you, sir. How many did we lose?" "Too many," the captain replied grimly. "But it could have been much worse without your covering fire. The enemy had us outnumbered 4-1, and we held until reinforcements arrived. That's something to be proud of." As Maria looked around at the surviving Marines, she realized that this battle would stay with her for the rest of her life. She had used her skills to protect her fellow soldiers and help them survive an impossible situation. It was exactly why she had joined the Marine Corps in the first place. The reinforcement commander approached her a few minutes later. Colonel Sarah Williams was a tall woman with graying hair and the bearing of an experienced combat leader. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I've been hearing remarkable things about your performance during this engagement. My intelligence officers estimate you eliminated at least 15 high-value enemy targets, including several commanders and specialists. Your actions likely disrupted their attack plan and bought crucial time for our arrival." "I was just doing my job, ma'am." "No, Sergeant, you went far beyond doing your job. You demonstrated exceptional skill, courage, and dedication under the most difficult circumstances possible. I'll be recommending you for the Silver Star." As the sun set over the desert, Maria finally had time to reflect on what had happened. 230 Marines had been surrounded and vastly outnumbered, but they had fought together and survived. Her role as a sniper had been critical, but so had the courage of every Marine who held the line. She thought about her family back home and knew that her father would be proud of her service. She had proven that determination, skill, and courage could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The battle was over, but Maria Rodriguez had become a legend among the Marines who served with her that day.